All right, moving on. US President Donald Trump has branded his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelenskyy a dictator without elections. Trump's broadside against Zelenskyy comes amidst an escalating back and forth over Washington's approach to the peace negotiations. Earlier, Zelenskyy had spoken against being left out at the Russia-US talks held in the Saudi capital Riyadh. He stated that Trump lives in a disinformation space that is coming from Russia. Trump promptly quipped that Zelenskyy talked the United States into spending $350 billion in a war that cannot be won. Trump also contended that Zelenskyy was misusing American aid intended for the war effort and had taken advantage of the Joe Biden administration. Adding to this, US Vice President J.D. Vance warned Zelenskyy that bad-mouthing Trump in public media is an atrocious way to deal with their administration. We all know that the war has dragged on for 3 years now. In the interim, the US has obligated about $183 billion to Ukraine. Though recently, a breakthrough phone call between Vladimir Putin and Trump has also taken place. So, what is the road ahead? Will the verbal feud impact Trump's push for peace is what we are going to discuss in the next half an hour with our guest. Joining us on the show is Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, former diplomat, Major General Sudhakar Ji, defense expert, also with us on the program. Professor Madhav Nalapa, the editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, joins us on the show. And last but by no means the least, Mr. Gautam Mukherjee, senior journalist, also with us on the platform. Professor Nalapa, how do you look at this back and forth between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelenskyy? Okay, the fact of the matter is that it's pretty clear that Zelenskyy wants peace at his own terms. Which is as good as saying that he does not want a peaceful resolution with Russia. Secondly, he wants to be a part of NATO, and this entire feud happened because of NATO in fact giving this outreach to Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Now the Americans want to opt out of this treaty, NATO that is, and Vladimir Putin is still holding Trump responsible for not realizing why this war started in the initial phase and place. It's all very confusing at this point in time. It seems that Zelenskyy, all he wanted was funding, and now that's stopped. He's not ready for peace. How do you explain this behavior, sir?
Well, as you correctly said, he's not ready for peace, and all that Donald Trump said is correct. Zelenskyy was a comedian, a moderately successful comedian, before somehow some individuals, we don't know who they are. I'm told, there's some oligarch names, and they put him up as a presidential candidate, as a candidate of peace. Irony of ironies, that he would ensure peace with Russia. And as soon as he got elected, well, that's the last election ever held in Ukraine, he turned totally against peace and totally supported the United States under Biden. And frankly, much of Europe in basically, going against Russia in terms of doing a lot of preparation for what looked like an operation that was going to be launched to take back the Russian-speaking territories that were in the possession of Russian-speaking Ukrainians since 2014. So in a preemptive move, Putin struck back in February 2022, and we all know that the war has dragged on for 3 years. The fact of the matter is that Russia is a much diminished power. You can see that from the fact that even now, it's not been able to claim the entirety of Donetsk and Lugansk province. It's not been able to win back that small salient of land in Kursk that Ukraine took over. And the real problem that NATO and the US is facing is hardly Russia, it's China. And the Chinese are secretly delighted that this is going on. So quite frankly, Donald Trump has acted as per American interests in ensuring that this war stops, at least on the American side. Zelenskyy will be left high and dry if he, if he adamantly refuses to understand the reality and make peace with whatever he has got left, for a simple reason that nobody can compensate for US funding and US arms that have flowed to Ukraine. And by the way, they've all flowed on the basis of long-term debt, and European banks are holding that debt. So once this war ends in a way which his European partners see as a failure, that those bonds are going to plummet in value, and those banks are going to be left holding very, very low value bonds, which they got at a very high price. So the reality is that Europe is staring in the middle of a catastrophe. There is no appetite for funding this war. There's no appetite, certainly, for sending soldiers. Some European leaders may talk boldly about it, but every single European leader, barring an exceptional location, Great Britain, where somehow the population is on board in this crusade against Russia, but the reality is that every single European leader who has supported this Ukraine war is suffered in the polls and at the expense of rivals who said very clearly what Donald Trump said, that we are going to pull out and you guys fix the war. It's a European war. The Europeans have to fix it. And that's exactly what Asia, Africa, Latin America, and now most of North America is saying we need.
You're absolutely right. And Gautam, that's a fair point that the Europeans have been holding this high moral ground to support Zelensky, but they have not been able to, support this war financially as much as the Americans have. The Americans, of course, now are feeling the pinch. $350 billion is a lot of money, and that's all come out of the taxpayers' contribution towards the American exchequer. What kind of a situation does Zelensky find himself in? Is he being driven by ego at this point in time? Because it doesn't seem practical that he should go on with this kind of a war against Putin, and now the Americans also against him.
Well, I think Zelensky is about to exit the stage. What has happened, if you take a step back, there was a pro-Russian government in Ukraine, which was deposed by the machinations of the EU and NATO, and Zelensky was set up. Zelensky was used as a prod to take on Russia. Russia had already annexed the Crimea. Now they were annexing various places. Then they declared a kind of unilateral independence for some of these provinces at the border of Russia, Russian speaking. And then the war began. And the war was sustained entirely by American money and arms. Now, it's pretty complex because on the one hand, Trump wants $500 billion worth of compensation by way of Ukrainian minerals and assets. As Professor Nalapat pointed out, the European banks are holding the debt of this war ostensibly, and what it means is that they will go bankrupt unless they sustain the war or they find a viable quid pro quo, similar to what Trump is suggesting. So history has overtaken Zelensky altogether. He hasn't cottoned on yet. He's still mouthing what he could get away with under the Biden administration when he was being feted and flounced and brought to the UN and brought to other forums. His wife was talking to Vogue. It was ridiculous that this lightweight person who has ruined his country and has been extremely corrupt in the process with massive kickbacks. Occasionally he'd find a scapegoat and sack him. Now it's his turn. He will soon exit. But it's deeper than that, because Trump has floated the idea that Ukraine really should be part of Russia. Secondly, he is conducting peace negotiations with Russia, without Ukraine, without Europe. So what this is amounting to, at a minimum, is the land that Russia has already got, it's going to keep, and the rest of Ukraine is going to be defanged by dint of lack of American support, and it will never ever join NATO. There will have to be some kind of assurance that is acceptable to Russia given to that effect. The Europeans and the NATO, the European part of NATO are now exposed, and I don't think that they have the gumption or the money or the wherewithal economically to do anything about it. And this is how this is going to end. First of all, Zelensky will be thrown out. Second, a ceasefire will take place under the new person who's put in now under, if you like, a Trump nominee, and countries such as Hungary and Moldova, which are pro-Russia, will play a part. China will play a part in the peace negotiations, either directly or behind the scenes. And that's how Ukraine will be brought to an end. Germany and Britain and France are going to be left in the shadows. That's what's happening.
All right, Ambassador Kapoor, how do you see this situation? The Americans, it seems, have woken up, and this insane amount of money that has gone to Ukraine. And Volodymyr Zelenskyy, in one of his interviews, also admitted that he does not know where half of it went. It's obviously funneled into a direction which has led to a lot of corrupt practices and a lot of corrupt bureaucrats who have taken advantage of the situation.
Vineet, it has been tragic comedy from the beginning, in the sense, on the one hand, comedian was involved, as Professor Nalapat also mentioned, who had sort of been forced into that scene, and he brought a great amount of tragedy, not only to Ukraine, but to the region and to the world at large, in terms of all the economic impact it has had on different parts of the globe since the war started. But the tragic part is so phenomenal in this whole story, in the sense that if we look at it at the economic level for Ukraine, it has been devastated. If we look at it at the sociological level, at the family level, at the mental health level, at any level, at the infrastructure level, whatever aspect we look at in Ukraine, families have been separated, divided, people have died. What was the entire effort for? If we have to have a reality check, was it worth it at all? Now, in 2014, Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt, then US ambassador in Ukraine, there's a very famous conversation about them discussing about this overthrow of the democratically elected government in Ukraine. And the language they have used is very intemperate, and it's a very notorious dialogue, in the sense that they're talking about overthrow of a regime, and they're talking about installing the next regime. And the president had to flee, and they are talking about bringing in $5 billion worth of money into the whole process, and talking to the opposition and the rebels. And that led to a lot of violence. That has destabilized the country phenomenally since then. So Trump is now trying to bring some sort of sense into this whole game, which has gone on for a long time, which has damaged the energy scenario globally, damaged the entire Europe, disrupted the entire Europe, in the sense their bills have gone up phenomenally, their inflation has gone up phenomenally. US military industrial complex, US deep state was actively involved behind this scenario as is coming out. I think if Trump starts reading some of the files which are there within his administration and within his system, about how Zelensky at one stage in March 2023 tried to sort of stop the war and start negotiations, and about how the British Boris Johnson was asked by Biden to fly into to Kiev to stop Zelensky from doing that. Even before the war started out, Russia had been telling every visitor who came, including French President Macron and the German Chancellor and the British PM, whoever met Putin, he was telling them again and again that the basic bottom line is that Ukraine should not be allowed to join NATO. And that was one guarantee he was seeking, and which seemed, according to Russian geostrategic interests, very legitimate, because it was a sort of a mirror event, if you compare it to the 1961 Bay of Pigs event where Cuba, when Russia tried to put missiles into Cuba, America objected because it was threatening their strategic space. So similarly, Ukraine has the largest border with Russia. And for Ukraine to become part of NATO and to have NATO weaponry and NATO troops on its soil, you can then sort of proceed with a plan to dismember Russia into some different number of countries. People have estimated that there are NATO designs and European designs too, and American designs, of course, primarily, to break up Russia into many countries, whether 6 countries or more, because Russia spans 11 time zones. It's the biggest country in the world. And its entire western flank would have got exposed with this Ukraine and NATO coming up to that, because Ukraine-Russia border is the biggest border of Europe. So for Russia, it felt, and a lot of the Indian analysts on a lot of channels argued that from the Russian geostrategic interest, Putin is giving a signal by keeping those 100,000 soldiers on the border with Ukraine for over 3 weeks and not sort of invading Ukraine. And it was a very clear signal to the West to do something. Austria had done that before in 1955 by declaring neutrality. Switzerland had declared neutrality. It would not have been difficult for US at that time to nudge Ukraine to declare neutrality. And that would have resolved the situation without, incurring this massive losses in all spheres. The sanctions which they have imposed on Russia has backfired very badly on the Western world. And there are some studies now which state that the sanctions have damaged the Western world more than Russia. So I think it's a very, very pathetic situation. It has devastated a large country like Ukraine. It will take a long time to recover. The financial implications have already been mentioned by some of my co-panelists. I'm going to stop here, Vineet, and give it back to you. And hope that Trump is able to resolve it. He's slowly going to come out with more statements about the US involvement in this whole process, because he has no love lost for Biden. So as soon as he starts reading those documents...
All right, sir. General Sudhakarji, what's Zelensky gaining out of this? And, this is important to understand that had he wanted, he could have stopped this war a long time ago. Had he wanted, he could have saved the lives of millions of people on either side. Had he wanted, this war would not have affected the world in a negative way that it has.
Vinit, good evening. Thank you. It's a delight to connect with NewsX from a very remote area in Madhya Pradesh. I'm in my regimental center, Mahar Center, Sagar. Connectivity is bad, Wi-Fi, it's coming off and on, so do forgive me if I get disconnected midway. Excellent question you have asked. The shortest answer in response to your question is, it was not the war of Zelensky. It was a different kind of a conflict being fought and demonstrated, orchestrated by multiple stakeholders hidden behind the facade. And who are these people? So anyway, to cut the long story short, I must compliment very distinguished and esteemed panelists who have given out their views in a very comprehensive manner. And to give out as a student of geopolitics and military science, my take on the whole issue is, no matter what Zelensky does, he knows that his days are numbered. It's a sign, gross signs of insecurity he's demonstrating. He will not get any kind of support from anywhere except for the declining interest and enthusiasm to support him from the European Union and UK. This is one part. Second part is, you see, no matter what people say and perceive Donald Trump to be, there are very important highlights which we must acknowledge. That we are in 21st century, the threat in 21st century is not the same as that was in 20th century. So what is this threat? The European Union is under a misnomer, misconceived kind of a threat. Being a military general, I must say that when you actually carry out an analysis of an ongoing conflict like this, we carry out the start party threat analysis. What is the threat analysis? Is Europe in 21st century going to be invaded by Russia with the tanks the way they invaded in 2000 in the 20th century? My answer to the question is no. The threat to Europe today is the existential threat. It is the both people who are migrating from the Northwest Africa and the Middle East. The demographic swell, the profile is undergoing change. The way of life is being threatened. The indigenous population, talk about Germany. I'm just back from Germany, and most of the distinguished panelists, they would have traveled off and on. Germany is suffering the biggest challenge for the existence of the indigenous population. They are migrating from their own homeland and to going to places in and around to Spain, Portugal, and all such kind of places. They don't have a place to have a stable life in Germany. Talk about France, talk about UK. So the demographic profile is undergoing change. Therefore, it would be in fitness of things for the European Union and UK to introspect and carry out a threat analysis de novo in a holistic manner. Third point that Donald Trump is trying to remind people is that it is America, which people have been branding it to be a declining superpower. And if it is a declining superpower, he has all the entitlements and the mandate, political mandate given by the people of America to revive the spirit of MAGA, make America great again. That can come about provided the economy is addressed. $36 trillion of debt as on today, meaning 123% debt to GDP ratio, meaning $1 trillion is being doled out every year as a kind of a debt servicing interest rates. If that is the fact, well, he would do well by pulling out in a military professional manner from Europe, because the threat to Europe today could become a threat to USA as it is manifesting the way it is coming about in past couple of months. He would do well to by pulling out the troops from the Europe, let Europe defend itself from the emerging threat. Threat is again not Russia. Third and most important point is, Vinith, that he's playing a very intelligent and very, I would say, calibrated game. The calibrated game is in October 2022, the national security strategy was announced and promulgated to highlight one aspect, that China is the central enemy which is to be addressed by the declining superpower. If China is the central enemy, they would do well if they can isolate China in a significant manner. By pulling Russia from the embrace of China towards American side, I think Donald Trump is playing his cards very deftly and close to the chest in a calibrated manner. Success is round the corner. They will definitely be able to cease fire. But no matter, it may take little time, but I think it is happening for the good, as is various basis. Something on the concept of line of control which we have with Pakistan, not a very ideal solution although, but in 21st century, stopping this mindless war would be worthwhile to go about in a progressive, systematic manner to bring about some
I appreciate your passion, sir.
I
Appreciate your points as well. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. But you're right, this is a big shake-up, one that was promised by Donald Trump before he assumed office. And this needless, this endless, unwinnable war that Donald Trump rightly pointed out needs to be stopped. And both the parties have to come to the table to make sure that no more lives are lost and no more funds from other countries that are being pumped into Ukraine are saved. We take a short break. Would like to thank everyone who joined in. Be right back.